Hello.
Yes, hi, Joshua, Sal. Um, we thought we'd have a chat about possession. I wrote an article on possession, and it did bring quite a few people who are really interested. And I think it is a subject well worth talking more about.
Yeah.
It's one of those concepts we take for granted, possession. You know, we just say possession and we all assume we know what we mean by it, but that's not necessarily true. Different people have a different understanding of possession. And you've got your own understanding of possession.
Yeah, well, there's different strands to it, isn't there? Possession, entity, attachment, all of these things. I think there's firstly what we create from our thinking, but then also I've become open-minded based upon my experiences that actually there is something else. There is something external influencing me. I was living in Mexico, and I had to leave, broken heart, ended up on the magical island of Bali, which is all about healing and personal development. And I really wanted to open my heart. And I went to see a priestess who gave me a water healing, pouring this water over me, and then my whole body was fitting, but then I had this permanent smile on my face. I think that's when I first started to understand what the beginning of somatic experiencing was all about for trauma release. And then I met another priestess who told me that I had energy on me that wasn't from my land. It was something that I collected from Latin America. She knew nothing about me, so I was just piqued my interest in that openness to explore these things. And this was all new to me, really, as somebody that was always very scientific and everything had to be proven. To be on this island surrounded by people exploring the metaphysics of everything and the esoteric. So I ended up having an exorcism, which was performed on me. And for me, it was a very beautiful hour. I felt like I was levitating. Whenever I've meditated, I've always had a purple light and aura around me, and that just intensified. And I was just taking off whilst, these priests and helpers were all feeling ill. There was vomiting going on. There was a lot of fitting of the bodies. That all ended. I went home, slept really well. But for the little village that I was staying in, all of the community there experienced quite radical things. All the chickens, the cats, and the dogs were very agitated. There were lots of snakes in the trees and snakes falling, and people finding that all these reptiles were everywhere. No one had a good sleep apart from myself. These priests were quite ill for the next couple of days, and then I just went on a little journey up a volcano upon my.
Hold on. So what do you think that was about?
I mean, they were convinced that they were removing evil entities from me, and from what I've learned, that these physical reactions that people are having, that is to do with the release. Or should they really be dabbling in these things? It's just, again, this human idea that I can heal you and I will fix you. I don't know. I don't know how they feel now. I haven't spoken to them about it. For my personal experience, it was very uplifting. It was a real release. They didn't really speak much English. There wasn't much communication. But I went up this volcano and I was in tears. And I came to the apex and went down, and then I just felt really light and full of love. And that was a big change for me in my life. And I kept witnessing these things, and I got involved with quite a lot of healers, and I was assisting them in their practice of helping others remove entities. And for them, it's very much, the unseen world. But for me, I do believe that, there's the mind trails that we create in ourselves, coupled with, some external intervention or violation that gets into us.
And then we've got the Hollywood version of possession.
Yeah. Was because there's always a lot of vomit and liquids, isn't there? Was what these priests experiencing was that the Hollywood, catalyst? for their inspiration, or again, just another a rabbit hole to get us confused by. I don't know.
It's so complicated. Because possession, there are so many types of possible possession, and either external forces that could generate possession within us. I personally believe that there are. Can we be possessed by our own ideas and beliefs? I think that's also very possible. I mean, we are all taught from very early on in our lives to have a particular viewpoint of life. It rather limits our perception from that perspective.
But the conditioning, the programs.
Yeah, we're definitely all programmed to a greater or lesser extent. And for programming to stick in human beings, you need to have fear. You need to have something to be afraid of. But I am very interested in possession, and especially after having read the comments that other people made to do with possession on Facebook, it really highlighted the way that people are so narrow-minded. One person said to me, after having put out the article, "Shut up!" That's how he wrote it. "Shut up!"
We're shouting.
Well, it's like SHO and then you. Like,
yeah,
make the word really long. "Shut up! Go away!"
It's the internet.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's really creating a reaction inside them, isn't it?
So I said, I wrote back and said, if this was in real life, you wouldn't be so disrespectful towards me. So he...
Well, maybe that he is. That's who he is. If he was socially conditioned, I must not say this. What are we seeing when people are online? It's a persona. Or is it really them at their core? They want to say that, don't they? I don't have that desire to say that because I wouldn't treat somebody like that. I'm curious about everyone's viewpoint.
So I then responded to that, and I was a little bit more... My first response was very nicey, gentle. My second one was a little bit more using more convoluted language to show that I knew how to speak English properly.
Yeah.
I like sort of so I've been a sort of gentle, I know
my stuff.
And,
is that zealotry?
And his response was, "Go away, go and die," or something like that. Don't, disappear, nobody wants you. I looked him up. He'd only been in that website a month. He'd been in that particular Facebook page, public. He'd only joined a month previously, and he's now talking as though he's in charge and he controls and he can dictate what other people may or may not say, which is so typical of this day and age. However, he highlighted this idea of fear, that when you've got a program and someone says something that you cannot really deal with because it threatens your perception of reality, then you react.
Cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance, yeah. And that is the problem that we have in this day and age, that we have been so indoctrinated by our parents, by our teachers, by the religious education, just by Hollywood, we're so indoctrinated into a particular viewpoint that we cannot bear anyone interfering with that viewpoint, because that viewpoint at deep down underneath of that is saying, I belong.
Mm-hmm.
I belong to the group. And as part of that belonging to the group, I am safe.
Yeah.
And if I take on board what you're saying, i.e. a different viewpoint, then this may well threaten my standing within my group. And then I will be alone.
Yeah.
Which is what we were talking before about the nail that stands out gets whacked on the head, first of all. That being vulnerable, that being... I saw an amazing program yesterday. It was about zebras. And apparently the idea behind it, actually no, I'll tell you what it was. It was Jordan Peterson talking. And he was talking about understanding people's motivations. And he said, they did some sort of experiment with zebras whereby when you look at zebras, you say, well, if that is meant to be a survival trait, how does that work? Because you're really standing out, so if there's a lion, they can see you're there. So these people decided to go and do an experiment. So they would just follow a particular zebra. So they went and they marked the zebra out. And as soon as they marked the zebra out, the lions now has something to focus in. Because when you look at all the zebras, they all look the same.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the lion, the pride, they need one particular animal to be able to focus. Either it's young or it's weak or it's lame. And then everybody can hone in on that particular one. So as soon as they marked this particular zebra, the lions, they went for it, highlighting that the safety for the zebras was looking the same in the pack. And this is what we do as human beings. Part of our indoctrination is to be the same, because if we're not the same, we stand out. And if we stand out, they're going to get us.
Yeah.
So what Jordan Peterson was saying was the motivation for humans is actually not to be noticed. You don't want to be exceptional. You don't want to be the best. You don't want to be this, because if you are, they're going to go for you.
Yeah.
Because now you're standing out from the group. So the average person finds safety in not rocking the boat, in not standing out. And that is the essence of indoctrination. And so, as human beings, we have all these programs inside us that rely on our not standing out, or just being invisible, being a part of the group. So don't talk, don't criticize beyond, criticize as part of the group, but don't stand out and criticize the group, because they'll go for you. So it's a terrible dilemma we are as a group. And that is a sort of possession. All those belief systems, they are possession. Mm-hmm. They have possessed the way we look at the world. And
that's why we have such blinkered, limited outcomes. And when new ideas come across, and are presented to us, they could actually be the solution. And yet, we close it down because it pulls the carpet from beneath us of everything, how we have established those very shaky foundations on what we believe and what we're about and what keeps our world safe. That to take on a new radical idea that could actually advance us is just shut down by academics and scientists, because it doesn't fit with what we know as reality, and that's a very scary thing. And so we're limited.
Reality. So subjective. So we've got that. That is a form of possession, And
It spells, isn't it? And so people are hypnotized and conditioned and coalesce around an idea, but could it be deep down that they know that's not the case, and that's what's creating that rub and that conflict when somebody comes along with a radical idea?
So you mentioned hypnotism there, and that's important because it also highlights how easy it is to possess a person from outside. Because you can hypnotize a person to be a chicken, and then they'll go and they'll behave like a chicken.
Yeah.
And you say, well, how is that possible? You know, I mean, like, if you're a human being, if you have an integrity, a sense of who you are, how could someone take that away from you?
We're open to suggestion, aren't we? And like we go into maybe 20, 30 hypnotic states per day. And so within that, you know, there's the media messages and what we pick up from others. It's so easy for us to absorb that, to become seduced by it and under a spell.
Under a spell. So coming back to your Bali experience, you know, they did their thing on you. You felt great. The group now, because they believe in dirty energy, now they have been hypnotized perhaps, self-hypnotized, hypnotized by the group into the belief that, oh yeah, you know, the spirits have now gone out of you and now we are suffering the trauma of that in some way or other.
Yeah.
So it gets really difficult to know what is true possession, because possession exists, but true possession as in possessed by an external entity, not by a belief, not by an idea, not by a program.
Another one to consider as well, what about the microbiome? You know, so somebody's got a bad diet, that microbiome is toxic and it wants to kill the person, which then creates a depression, a brain fog. So the system in itself can be taken over, and then that wants to actually destroy you.
A bit radical, perhaps. We are three brain beings. We've got a physical, we have an emotional, and we have the mental. And if we damage the physical body, then that is going to affect our capacity to think coherently, properly. Our minds, with all those programs, they affect our emotions. They do suppress our emotions, which in turn affects the physical body. If those three brains are not working in tandem together, then the person is suggestible, which is what hypnotism is about. Basically, one of the brains is asleep. When we've only got two brains working, we are suggestible, but this is when we can actually get possessed externally. And external possession has actually got gradients. So there is partial possession and there is complete possession.
I mean, for example, the police in this country put on more officers when there's a full moon.
Yeah.
So is that a kind of, on that gradient scale, a partial possession?
Well, I was sort of coming to that, and yes. I mean, this brings the concept of the critters and the full moon and the new moon, and how we're all affected by this. But I want to bring it a little bit closer to home at the moment and say how the thoughts in our heads possess us. And I think most people would relate to this, that the brain can talk and talk and talk. A person can feel quite neurotic if that talking becomes very incessant. And we can easily believe that all that talking is either us, who we are, or that an external force is telling us how to be,
Mm-hmm.
depending on that gradient of possession, whether it's self-induced possession through one's programming or external possession. So to that extent, I would say that most people on this earth are possessed to a greater or lesser extent, which complicates knowing when a person is truly possessed.
Mm-hmm.
And for those people whose level of possession is just the thoughts in their head, the answer is to move away from their head. And most people are in their head because they have disassociated from their body and from a lot of their emotions. So the only safe place that's left for them is their head. And that is part of the problem we have in our world today. And connecting with one's body, as in, I mean, a lot of people, I know quite a few people who, they say, oh, I love to go for a run or on a bike ride because it clears my head. It clears
What's they got headphones in?
Well, they may have headphones as well, but it clears my head.
Mm.
When I was younger, my head used to drive me crazy.
Mm.
And the way that I used to deal with it is I used to put stories, literally headphones, and listen to a story so that I would be distracted from the thoughts in my head. What I didn't know then, which I do now, is that the thoughts in my head were trying to spare me from emotions which I did not feel that I could deal with.
Mm-hmm. So you buried it.
I was doing my best to bury them, but with the thoughts in my head.
That's the mindset, though, isn't it? And it's a generational thing as well. You know, don't talk about your feelings. Just get on with it. You know, be a man and all of that. So people really are again conditioned that, you know, these things you've just got to bury. I'm being a wimp.
I don't think anything's changed.
I think we've moved on, and I know the parents that are bringing up their children to talk about these things, and that emotions are something that we can discuss, and especially for men as well.
Some emotions.
Yeah.
You see, a lot of people come together. Women, for example. I'm not being sexist here, but women primarily, they love to talk about their process as a means of coming to terms with something rather. That doesn't mean to say that they resolve the emotion. That doesn't mean to say that they actually experience the emotion. There is talking about an emotion, and then there is experiencing an emotion.
Yeah.
And they're sort of slightly different.
Mm.
To deal with the emotion, we actually have to go in and actually experience the emotion. And this is what I was stopping myself from doing. The talking, so something happens in my world. I have some little fracas with someone or other, and then my head is going 10 to the dozen. I'm replaying, I'm reliving, I'm doing all of this. But what I'm actually doing is, I am not experiencing the emotion. I'm not experiencing the shame, the embarrassment, the anger perhaps, you know, whatever the nature of the emotion be. I mean, eventually it's always fear, but whatever the nature of the emotion, I'm not actually experiencing it. I am talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not experiencing the discomfort that emanates when we truly experience an emotion. Because emotions are very uncomfortable by their very nature. And it takes a certain level of emotional stamina to stay there and experience that. And so, to the extent that I didn't do that, so my head is going 10 to the dozen, talking. And so my choices then is either distraction by listening to something or doing something physical that takes me out of my mind and into my body. Nothing gets resolved, but it gives me a respite. So that, I mean, that's primarily, that is the problem with mankind in terms of possession. The fact that we don't experience our emotions, and so we then move into our heads. Some other people move into their bodies, or a combination of the two, but it's the avoidance of our emotions, the experience of the emotion, not just the talking about emotions with other people, but actually experiencing the emotion, experiencing the uncomfortableness. Yeah. But there is real possession. But real possession is, from conversations I've had in the past with Charlie, they're very rare. Real true possession is very, very rare. And what that implies is that there is nothing in us. The home is vacant, basically. You know, to get a squatter in my house, it means that I've gone away somewhere. If I'm in the house, the squatter is not going to get in. Yeah. So the implication of that is the house has got to be vacant. And according to Charlie, there is 800, and last time I spoke with him, 832 people who are in that particular predicament. And for the house to be vacant, that means the person has been so traumatized that the fragment of soul that is within us is so removed, it's like almost no longer in the body. In fact, you do hear of people like that who said, oh, I had this traumatic experience and I was seeing myself from the top of the room. I was looking down at myself. Yeah. So that is like big trauma, disassociation. And a person who has been traumatized like that from very early on in their life, you know, like you either have no parents, or you may have parents but they're away all the time. You end up in a boarding school at the age of 3, 4, or 5. So you're now not getting that warmth, that affection, that whatever it is. You're having to survive in an alien environment. Perhaps they're quite brutal in that environment because it's filled with other children who've gone through that trauma process, and so they're now treating you like meat. So you've got this sort of process that goes through life. I'm not saying that it's necessarily like that, but potentially it's a quality. And so you grow up very, very damaged. And the more damaged a person is, the more sexually deviant they become. And I'm not talking about just ordinary relationships of whether we're talking gay, whether we're talking heterosexual, who seek intimacy and a love relationship. I'm talking about people who are seeking satisfaction through, I'm trying not to use certain words, but their sexual antics are beyond the pale of the average human being. And this makes these people particularly susceptible to exploitation by others, to blackmail, because of their sexual deviancy, because it's so beyond the pale. However, these people, unfortunately, are people who usually, not always, but usually come from wealthy backgrounds. And they have right connections, and they end up in top positions of power because of the wealth and their connections. And maybe I should stop there on that particular talking about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a correlation, isn't it? You know, if you're in that mindset of power and you have the wealth, and you've accumulated that, what else can you control, manipulate, which then moves into the arena of kind of sex. So it makes sense, doesn't it? And, you know, we also see that, you know, how pornography is freely available now and how this is affecting society as well. Another level of programming of what that experience is. I think that could be quite problematic for society as well.
So there is possession, but only for a very few people.
So
true possession.
Psychopathy, is that always possession?
Well, this raises another issue, which is, well, if we look at the world today, we can see that there are huge problems on this earth. Look at the world today. Look at what's been going on over the last 3-4 years.
Yeah.
The amount of fear that's been generated. Look at the world over the last few thousand years. Slavery, brutality,
domination, control,
total domination and
competition,
control. Yeah.
Hierarchies.
Yeah, total, complete. And we say, oh yes, you know, we've come through the dark ages. Actually, we've been here for millions of years. It was never like that. Humans, we all have a soul within us. We all have a fragment of soul within us. And this fragment of soul has been here through previous incarnations. And as mankind over the last few million years, we've never been a big number. It's always been never more than 100 million people in the earth, on this earth. It's only now that we've been increasing exponentially. But throughout the world's history, humanity has had souls, fragments of souls, which have been evolving. They've learned how to be inside a human body. You know, I shared earlier on about my struggle between my mind and my emotions, and how this is such a common thing in our world. Well, this is all part of the soul's learning to being in charge of the body.
Mm-hmm.
We come into this world and we're full of love. We're just joy. We're just joy, pure joy. And then gradually as we grow up, that joy disappears. We become sly, we become conniving, we become all manner of things to survive within the world. We learn to hold our counsel, not to share how we feel unless we explode. So we are fearful creatures. We've become fearful creatures. And we're not taught how to deal with this body, which is genetically engineered to survive in a state of fear. Because that's how we are. You know, survival in the wild requires being able to switch on fear and switch it off when we're done. But it needs to come on. In this modern world, fear is on all the time. Mm-hmm. And we don't know how to switch the fear off. We're not taught how to switch the fear off. We're not taught how to grow beyond that, to go back into our hearts. And so that lack of understanding, that lack of education, means that we go through life in a state of fear and possession. But it wasn't always like that, because in previous lifetimes, and I'm going back a long time now, they learn how to grapple with that. And so the majority of the group, they had learned how to deal with that fear. Existential fear, which is there, is part of the body, it's part of the system. And so they taught their children how to be a proper human being, where yes, it's okay to have fear, but we are more than fear. we're also loving human beings, and how to be one with one's environment, how to really connect and be spontaneous, because there wasn't the indoctrination that we have today.
Yeah.
And so what happened was that those soul fragments, they were evolving through each lifetime and then moving on from this planet. 3.5 million years ago, when the creatures came online, they began to have an effect on humanity. But it was very, very small. It wasn't enough to rock the boat. That only happened very, very slowly, because although new souls, if you like, for the sake of argument, were always coming into bodies, the number were very, very small. And so those souls which had already gone through all of that, and they were fully in themselves, they could guide these younger souls to learn how to deal with their own immaturity, with their own fears, learn how to grow into the body so that they are in charge of their own system.
Mm-hmm. Why don't we have that now? Why isn't there, older souls helping younger souls, or are they?
Well, this is what I'm trying to get to, that gradually, as time moved on, those souls were moving on to other pastures, new other planets, continuing their evolution. And gradually, there were less and less evolved souls and more younger souls. So 5,000 years ago, the tables turned. Suddenly now, the level of small souls were reaching a more critical mass, and there were not enough older souls to guide the younger souls. This group of younger souls, and this is where the psychopathy comes in, they started to take positions of power and control. And once they took positions of control, and in a pyramid-shaped thing, control is always by those with money, those who manage to... You see, when you come to psychopathy, we're talking about people who lie, who cheat, who will say whatever needs to be said so that they can get their way. They can manipulate others. And the only ones they truly need to manipulate are the other younger souls who are fearful and who are easily led, because they don't understand, they're not in control, they're fearful, and they will follow orders. If you manage to get yourself into a position where you can affect their well-being, then you have control over them. And so it's done. So 5,000 years ago, suddenly they found their way to the top. They had their armies, they had the fearful who would easily follow orders, and so it's moved on to the present day. Nothing's changed. 5,000 years, nothing's changed. So they've kept their position of power and control, and it doesn't take many of them. And so today we have 1/3 of humanity is composed of these younger souls. 2/3 of humanity, they're souls who have been around a few times, and they've learned how to take control of their bodies to a greater or lesser extent, except they're born into a world where they're programmed from day one, where they're traumatized from day one. So now they have to not only deal with the instinctive fears, which are part and parcel of being a human being, of genetically DNA programming, because fear is a useful emotion. It allows us to fight or to flight. But it needs to be switched off. One needs to know when to switch the fear off, because it's no longer appropriate. But we are brought up into this world experiencing fear from very early on. And don't go outside the group, because you're the one who's going to get noticed. So that fear, that is a fearfulness that keeps everyone submissive. And that fearfulness stops us from dealing with our emotions. It stops us from moving beyond and really taking control of our bodies. And when I say taking control, I'm talking now about the fragment of soul within us. That needs to take control. And to take control of the body is to come from one's heart, because that's where the soul comes from. And that is the dilemma today, that we've got a third of humanity who are low-level souls. Some of them are very sly, very devious, and there's a few of those who are totally controlled. And they are affecting the rest of us. And the rest of us have been damaged. And yet the time has come for us to wake up and realize, look, it's time to take control of our bodies. And in fairness, you can see it out there. There's a lot of people out there who are going for meditation and all these alternative practices, because they know they're seeking control of their bodies. What I mean by this is control of the vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
They're seeking to be in charge of the vehicle rather than being possessed by the programming, which is what's happening. So you've got all these developed souls, 2/3 of humanity who have developed souls, and yet they are possessed by their programming. And they need to wake up. But wake up isn't, at the moment, there's a lot of talk of waking up.
Mm.
And there's a lot of waking up towards the way that we're indoctrinated by the media, the way we're indoctrinated by governments, the way we're indoctrinated by religion, the way we're indoctrinated by history, by physics. Just about everything is all part of the same parcel of indoctrination that limits our viewpoint. It narrows our perception. Waking up is looking inside ourselves, experiencing our emotions, experiencing the pain, the tension, changing our diet, going for food that will allow us to be healthy rather than being a bit foggy in our heads, like you were saying. We need to clean the vehicle.
That's also what we consume as well. You know, that gets down to films and media and newspapers and gossip as well, and judgment.
Yeah, it's all part of it.
It's all part of it, isn't it?
It's all part of it. It's a complicated scenario, but it isn't really, in that we need to appreciate that we are possessed. We're not possessed perhaps in the absolute sense of we're vacant and someone else has come in, but we are possessed through indoctrinations. And we need to question. We need to question our thinking. We need to question the way we see the world. We need to look, or we need to go beyond mainstream media to look for alternative viewpoints. Because if we live in a world where we have been indoctrinated by a certain viewpoint, we're not going to find the answers.
But here's the thing, though, that within that alternative sphere, there's a lot of misinformation, and I believe psychological operations put within that to then confuse people even more.
Yeah,
so much discernment is required.
All of that is true.
But it's so much influence again, worrying about what the world is, and I see lots of people that go down these rabbit holes. And then that becomes an obsession, and that becomes identity, and that becomes a trap for them too. So it's a lot of the time just getting back in here. It's focusing less on what I need to be doing, but what I'm putting in. And that's the bit that gets me is the fact that I've gone through my cycles and my patterns and my grooves, and I can see that it's made me unhappy, it's made me unwell. It's a waste of my time. It's a waste of my life. And I recognise that within me, and I've said to myself, I'm not having this anymore, I'm not doing this, and I make those changes. Yet I see with clients and with people that I meet that so many people are just enjoying doing that problem. They don't want to, it's that fear of facing it, but why that they can't have that conversation with themselves to say, I deserve better than this, and I don't want to be these thoughts and these programs. Why can't they just reflect to that level?
You said it yourself, having this conversation with himself. See, in an ultimate sense, I mean, it's a complicated scenario.
Yeah.
Step number one is the realization that we are advanced souls, and so we do have discernment if we will allow ourselves to listen to ourselves. So, when I was a young lad, I was always very surprised how I very quickly, like a duck to water, I would hear theories of the universe, of what life was all about. Oh yeah, I can relate to that. I didn't understand it. I didn't have the mental whatever it was to understand it, and yet I did. It made sense to me.
Yeah.
Whereas other people, highly intelligent, very well read, very sort of university degree type of mentality, rubbish, there's total dismissal. So they couldn't go there, and yet I did. What allowed me to go there, in part, is an internal impulse that comes from the soul, an understanding we've actually been here before. These concepts are not alien. I may not understand how to change it, but I know there's something here.
Yeah, it resonates.
Yeah? It resonates. And so that's step number one, is listen to your guts, and something resonates, you go with it.
Yeah, how can we listen to our guts if we haven't purified our temple? It's part of that, isn't it? There's an accuracy, and we can increase our accuracy of our intuition if we're cleaning our act up of our thoughts and our toxins.
It's not black and white, and we all have a process, and we all go through experiences and learning, and it's all experience.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's all experience. But to get from A to B is not just one line. There's many routes, and some of them you're going to have a few pitfalls. The important thing is that you're on your way to B.
Yeah.
Yeah. It may be so. For example, there's a great many people who believe in being a vegetarian or even a fruitarian because they think it's really good for their soul. They have an innate sense that I don't want to be responsible for the death of another being. That is a laudable, unless you're a psychopath, you don't want to be responsible for another death. And so that is a spiritual thing, and that's important. It's important to acknowledge that. So that's part of the process. However, we're also creatures of this earth. We're not just spiritual beings, we are creatures of this earth. And so we need to eat whatever it is that we need to be healthy in our physical bodies. And that means we need to listen to our body to tell me what I want, not what I want with my head. What is my body demanding? What am I craving for?
Yeah.
And not just because I'm addicted to sugar, but what am I actually craving for, because that's what I need. A pregnant woman will go for a sandia because there's potassium in it. Oh, I can't get enough sandia, and my auntie was one of those, she desperately needed, and if you got near her sandia, the knife came up, she was pregnant, that's what she needed. She knew, her guts were telling her, I need to eat sandia, not because of the sandia, because her guts knew that there was potassium in that sandia that she needed. Yeah, just as a case in point.
But we can also make bad choices as well, can't we? I've had a real hummus addiction, and that's actually been bad for me. And I'm thinking that, it's not my brain that wants this. This is my guts. They really need this, but it's poisoning me because I've had too much of it.
Well, this is the other side of the coin. That if you have too much of a poison, you're no longer able to discern what is good or bad for you.
That's my point. So if we're going to trust our intuition, we've got to clean our act up a bit, haven't we?
It all goes hand in hand. And it's not that straightforward, because it's not just cleaning your physical. You have to clean your emotional, you have to clean your mind.
Absolutely, yeah.
You have to clean yourself of all those programs. And then you have to clean yourself of all those suppressed emotions which are affecting you from the background. So that's also another form of possession. When you've got emotions you haven't experienced, and they're inside you, they are dictating how you are in the world. And they're out of your awareness. So to that extent, you're possessed by emotions, suppressed emotions. So, it is it's a complicated scenario. However, there are so many people who are seeking this. And the more people who connect with their hearts, the quicker the change will happen. Because we all affect each other.
Yeah.
And so our vibrational frequency extends to the environment. So if I'm in my heart, then it's going to get easier for you to be in your heart, and so on and so forth.
We're all a tuning fork.
We're tuning forks, and we all vibrate, and we can affect each other for good or for ill.
Yeah, but we can convince ourselves that we're going down this path of purification, but actually we're stuck in identity. Because I know some people that have been, devout Buddhists and have followed that practice of Zen as well, and their life's, what's happening in reality isn't quite adding up. They've got that real disconnect. There's a real, the dark night of the soul going on for them.
98% of the world population is trapped right now. However, I want to make clear that only 1/3 are responsible for us being trapped. And they can't help themselves, it's simply where they're at. And they've been affecting the rest of us for the last 5,000 years. However, right now, there is more and more souls who have come onto this earth to change the dynamic. And so these 2/3, they will do this, we will succeed here. But we need to become aware that we are possessed. We are possessed by programs. We are possessed by our suppressed emotions. And we've got the critters on the outside who are prodding us on the full moon and the new moon and activating our reactivity, making it harder. Because every time that, well, I don't know if they make it harder. They're doing their best to make it harder. Oh, no, they're not. They're just feeding. The critters, they're just doing what they do.
Feeding off of fear.
They're feeding off the fear. And so they need to prod people. It's a bit like a baby does to the mother, on the boob. They're with their paws, they're sort of pressing there just to get the milk flowing. That's all they're doing. They're just feeding. So they're not to be blamed. They're simply doing their bit. Blame is so disempowering. We need to acknowledge, and we can only do this through observation. We need to observe, yes, my thoughts are going crazy all the time. Why are they going crazy? Have a look at your abdomen. What emotions are going on in me? What am I? And it's not easy. It's not easy to have that focus. Look down. Look at what's going on in here. Move into your lower abdomen. What am I experiencing? What is my emotion? Go with it. I'm angry. I'm jealous. I'm envious. Whatever it is, experience it. Go with it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean go with it by dumping it on someone else. Go with it within ourselves. Experience that within ourselves. Acknowledge, yes, I am damaged. I am not in control. I am not here. I'm not fully here. I am at the mercy. I'm at the mercy of the words in my head. I'm at the mercy of my cravings for sugar or whatever other addiction it is. I am at the mercy of so much within me. And I'm not saying deny where we're at. I'm saying observe, notice where we're at, and experience where we're at. Really fully experience it, because
yet so many people are afraid to look. And that's why then some people move into the world of, ayahuasca and other plant medicines, and DMT is becoming very popular. People wanting a quick way to show them the way. So, but this inability to self-actualize and just look, there's so much. I had that fear myself, but the overall riding desire, I'm just like, I'm not having this. I deserve to feel good about life. I want to be about love. But
I'm not going to dismiss the psychotropic drugs out of hand, because I believe they can fulfill a positive purpose in helping a person come to terms with their imbalances.
they're like stabilizers on a bike, but you never learn. You can also ride a bike without the stabilizers. So that dependency.
I see them more like a reboot.
Mm-hmm.
When a person is stuck within a particular possession, because one can be mentally possessed with a particular viewpoint, and it could be fear of death, for example. Yeah,
Which is a common one.
and so a psychotropic, and I'm not saying go and do it, but a psychotropic can reboot the system so that we disassociate from that ego that is so bound us, and then see the world different. See that, in fact, actually, hello, there's a heart here. I'm not just the words in my head. There is more to me.
Yeah.
So it's not a cure, but it is like suddenly the sun shines through the clouds.
But it's quite a radical intervention, though, isn't it?
It is, and it doesn't work for everybody.
No.
If people have got a lot of trauma inside of them, then they may not have the resources to experience that trauma. And so to be open to that trauma, it could be a kill or cure. It could totally send you lulali because you just don't want to go there, and you won't go there, and you burn the bridges and you run away. So you've lost the plot, you'll never get back in there. So if you're highly traumatized like that, it's a real bad idea. But if you have already got a certain level of self-awareness, acceptance, congruity between the three brains, if you've got that connection, it doesn't have to be a whole connection, but if you've got that connection, if you've got that anchor to anchor you to reality, then you can go into that experience, lose the plot in the sense that you move beyond the ego constraints. The sun shines, oh yeah, I know who I am, and you come back. It hasn't changed your everything, but you've now rebooted, and now you can laugh at that particular possession. That particular program now does not have power over you.
Laugh and you win.
And that is so true. Yeah. So possession is so complex. And for that 2/3 of humanity, we need to overcome our possessions, because they're not true possessions, they're not evil spirit possessions, they are possessions of our programmings, they are possessions of our unexpressed emotions. They're possessions which have been imposed on us by our society. But we do have the experience to move beyond that, which is why we're seekers. We are seeking. We know that the world as it is does not fulfill us. There is something in us that's knowing for something different. And that is the spark, that searching spark, that is the soul trying to find its way to here, to the heart.
Yeah.
I think probably we've said enough. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.